Simon Clark is a YouTuber and he makes videos about climate change science, and they're pretty good videos. He's pretty knowledgeable. The videos are persuasive. He's a handsome guy. However, Simon Clark drives me crazy because he's so biased. What do I mean by biased? I'm going to let Simon Clark explain what he means by biased, and he's so biased that in his explanation of what he means by biased, he's going to show how biased he is. Let's take a listen.
Bias. In everyday language, we say that something or someone is biased if they have an inclination towards or a prejudice against a particular group of people or a particular conclusion. For example, we might say that a hiring firm has a similarity bias if they only hire people who look like they do.
Good so far. I think everyone's fine with that definition of bias. It sounded good to me. He even gave an example that seemed okay, but he couldn't leave it there. He added one more example, and this is the one that I got the problem with, so let's listen to the next example here.
Or if a newspaper only publishes articles about peer-reviewed research into how the climate is rapidly changing and no articles about how scientists are woke, we might say they have a bias towards reality.
He's being cheeky here. He's making a joke, I know, but he shows 3 Guardian articles in a row, and he says, if you're a news outlet like them who only use peer-reviewed research and don't mess around dabble in culture war issues, then you just simply have a bias toward reality. This smugness drives me crazy. Look, I think he actually thinks The Guardian is simply biased toward reality, and this is delusional. Everybody knows The Guardian is a left-leaning newspaper. You can like The Guardian and admit that it's a left-leaning newspaper. Maybe you don't believe me. Maybe you're like, I don't think The Guardian's left-leaning. Okay, let's ask a third party. So AllSides is a nice website. It goes through and tracks which media sources are right-leaning and left-leaning. And you could just ask it, hey, AllSides, how's The Guardian here? Obviously left-leaning because, The Guardian's left-leaning. Now maybe you're like, I don't trust AllSides. Maybe they're biased. Okay, fine. Let's ask The Guardian. Hey, Guardian, do you think that you are biased? Here's a Guardian article by a Guardian columnist. If you scroll down, you realize, the Guardian columnist writes, quote, The Guardian, for example, is an explicitly left-leaning paper, and everybody knows it. Everybody knows it, I know. So why would Simon Clark use The Guardian as an example of a newspaper that's not biased? Okay, look, maybe you don't believe this. You're like, this is one article. This guy doesn't speak for The Guardian. Okay, fine. I brought all the receipts. Okay, let's get them all on the table here. Here's a Guardian article specifically on climate change. So let's see how objective The Guardian is about climate change. So the title of this article is 30 Years Later, Deniers Are Still Lying About Hansen's Amazing Global Warming Prediction. This thing's dripping with subjectivity. You don't use words like amazing, lying, and deniers if you're trying to be objective and simply refer to peer-reviewed research. So what is this all about? Who is this Hansen guy? Who are these liars? So James Hansen, this guy in the picture right here, he was a NASA scientist. He ran some computer models, and he was like, oh crap, I think the world's going to warm up due to the greenhouse effect. So he went and testified in front of Congress in the late 80s. And he was like, hey, Congress, I think the Earth's going to warm up. And he showed them this graph from his paper from 1988. So here's Hansen's original graph from his paper. He ran some computer simulations. This black line down here, I'll make it bolder. This black line's the actual temperature record. Like Hansen gave this in like around 1988. So he knew what the actual temperature was of the Earth up to that point. And then he crafted some computer simulated models. He made 3 models based on how much emissions would be emitted from that point onward. So scenario A, he predicted would happen if, and again, this is the temperature rise on the vertical. This is how much the temperature would increase. Hansen predicted, here's how much temperature we increase and we'd expect if we continue to exponentially emit greenhouse gases. Pedal to the metal. Just continue exponential growth in greenhouse gases. He predicted this is how much temperature would rise. If we curb greenhouse gases a little, so we still increase greenhouse gases, but it only kind of increases linearly, he predicted we'd meet scenario B of temperature increase. And if somehow we could curb our CO2 so much that greenhouse gases were net zero, we could reach net zero by 2000, then we'd get a temperature increase of scenario C. Well, I mean, it's 2023 now. These were predicted in 1988, and they went out to 2019 or so. We're in 2023. We know where the temperature went. So how good were these predictions? Well, here, this black line here was the actual temperature record that we just measured, so we know where the temperature was. So scenario A, obviously much too high. B is a little too high. C is a little too low. So, I mean, they're not bad. If you just say they split the difference, you made a pretty good prediction. But A's too high, B's a little too high, C's a little too low. So who are these liars then? Who are the people lying and denying? The one the Guardian's referring to, if you scroll down, is Pat Michaels. So this guy right here is Pat Michaels. He worked for the Cato Institute. He's a right conservative-leaning guy. They say Pat Michaels, who had his own presentation in Congress, this was after we had the temperature record, or at least some of it. Pat Michaels deleted Hansen's scenarios B and C, the ones closest to reality, and only showed scenario A to make it seem as though Hansen had drastically overpredicted global warming. This is bad. This is detestable. This is dirty pool. Pat Michaels went to Congress and he was like, look, he deletes B and C. He just shows A. Look at how bad. You can't trust these global warming guys. They can't predict anything right. Look at how bad he exaggerated how high the temperature went. That's rude. That's, I don't condone that. I, fully disavow such behavior. So I agree with the Guardian. Yeah. Pat Michaels, that was a jerk move. You shouldn't do that. In fact, let's listen. Simon Clark talks about this. So let's hear what he has to say about this type of effect where you start deleting data that's inconvenient.
Yet, the Hansen plot is frequently shown with only scenario A, the most unrealistic and the furthest from observations. And this deliberate omission is done to peddle a narrative that climate science doesn't know what it's doing and that global warming isn't real.
Okay, so deliberate emissions to peddle a narrative is bad. This is not good. Let's continue listening.
And this is, frankly, willful distortion of very good science.
Frankly, willful distortion. I agree. I actually fully agree with Simon Clark here. What Pat Michaels did was willful distortion by deleting evidence that was inconvenient. It's a good thing the Guardian doesn't ever do that, the Guardian being the pillar of objectivity. Sure good that they don't do that. Oh, wait, you just have to scroll up. The same article, okay? This is the same article where they complain about Pat Michaels deleting data that's inconvenient. Let's just scroll up. Well, look at that. The Guardian deleted A and C because A and C is inconvenient. They thought B was pretty close. They're like, look how good B is. Look how good the prediction is. In the same article where they complain about Michaels deleting scenarios to make it seem as though the prediction was bad, they delete scenarios to make it seem as though the prediction was good. But they go a step farther. They do Michaels one better. They don't have scenario B. They have adjusted scenario B. What the hell is adjusted scenario B? It says, the trend was reduced 27% to reflect the actual radiative forcing from 1984 to 2017. I was looking for a source on this. It just says illustration, Dana Nucitelli. And I was like, what the heck? So what they are saying, what they're claiming is this. They're claiming that, these scenarios are all based on how much emissions there was. So the person writing this, Dana Nucitelli, is like, hey, the emissions weren't actually as high as B was presuming. So if you put in those emissions, it'll lie that graph smack down on the temperature and just be an amazing global warming prediction. Here's the problem. Part of that's true. Yes, the emissions weren't as high as B presumed. And if you factored that in and reran the scenario, B would come down a little bit. So it would be a little bit better. That's not what would bring it all the way back down to reality, though. What they're not telling you in this article, in this Guardian article, is that in Hansen's models, he was using a climate sensitivity parameter around 4.2. What does that even mean? What that means is that 4.2 degrees of warming is what you'd expect if you were to double the CO2 in the atmosphere. That's what the climate sensitivity parameter means. 4.2. If you go back and look in Hansen's original paper, you realize that even he knew that was high. He said in his original 1988 paper, look, I know this is kind of high, but I'm going to use it because I think this is the right one. But he knew other people had a lower climate sensitivity parameter. And in fact, what you'd have to do in order to get scenario B to line right up, you'd have to use a climate sensitivity parameter around 3 degrees Celsius of warming for a doubling of CO2, somewhere around 3, which is actually what the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, actually thinks it is now. Most climate scientists thinks the climate sensitivity is that if you doubled CO2, you'd get around a 3-ish increase in degrees Celsius. So the Guardian doesn't tell you this, though. The Guardian just says, it's amazing. Look at the global warming prediction. It's like, yeah, if you go change the model, it's amazing how good you could do if you just post-dict what happens. So just really, really misleading. It's disgusting. Guardian is one of the least objective articles on global warming I've ever read, quite honestly. Now you might be like, Okay, but that's not Simon Clark didn't write this article. Why are you getting so mad about Simon Clark here? Well, one, he said the Guardian was unbiased, which, come on, I can't be serious about that. Secondly, you might be like, Simon Clark didn't like fudge his data. Okay, buckle up, everybody. Buckle up. I told you I brought all the receipts. Let's take a look in this same video, right? Same video where he's complaining about how it's unconscionable to be fudging data over here. So let's just see what he does. So he talks about, let's just listen.
Life. This brings us back to Hansen's prediction and this graph. Because here's the thing, Hansen didn't make one prediction. He made three. One assumed that greenhouse gas emissions would increase exponentially from 1988. One assumed that emissions would increase but linearly. And the last assumed that emissions would peak around the year 2000 and then decrease.
Okay, look at this graph. And then let's listen. Okay, just look at it. You might see if you could spot anything funny. Everyone just look at this graph. You know, I didn't the first time I saw it. And then I looked at it and I was like, holy crap. Everyone just look at it, see if you could spot the funny. Okay. Now here,
comparing all three predictions to observations, we see that Hansen's scenario B is pretty close.
Pretty close. Scenario B, the blue one here. It's like scenario B, pretty close. This is sort of the thing that, you know, climate activists want to do. They want to be like, scenario B. Can you believe how close that is? Anyways, but I mean, it's not that bad. Look, I don't think Hansen's predictions were that bad. He got the general trend right. He's like, the temperature's going to increase. So, you know, credit to Hansen on that one. Even though, okay, here's the wild thing. Hansen, you know, he had his climate sensitivity parameter too high, 4.2. He recently wrote a paper, 2023. The guy can't stop himself. James Hansen was like, oh, even though I predicted my predictions too high because I had a climate sensitivity parameter 4.2 and everyone was telling me it was more like 3. Hansen just wrote a paper in 2023 that was like, you know, I actually think the parameter is 4.8. And everyone's like, what the frick? Every climate scientist around right now is like, what the hell? Hansen's crazy. This guy never learns. Like, if he would have simply chosen a climate sensitivity parameter around 3, he would have been smack dab on it. But he still can't help himself. Anyways, I digress. So let's look at this one right here is the graph that Simon Clark made. And you notice something weird. He says, scenario B is so good. Like, it's so close. I didn't notice at first, but I was like, I followed this back and I'm like, what the frick? Like, keep following this blue line. And you notice, at one point, the blue line, scenario B, which is supposed to be a computer simulation, the blue line is exactly on top of the black observed temperature anomaly. And I'm like, what the frick? That's not right. Like, scenario B didn't perfectly track the temperature over here because it was a computer model simulation. You know, Hansen simulated it from like, I don't know, like 100 years. It can't be right on it. So I went back and checked my data. On the original graph, you can go to the original graph. Here's the original graph. You realize scenario B, this is straight from his paper, Hansen's paper. Scenario B is marked with little triangles. You know, you got the little triangles right here. So let's play the game I loved as a kid. We're going to follow the triangles. And we're going to be like, okay, so follow the triangles. Here's a triangle. And we got triangle here, you know, here. You just keep finding all the triangles. And you're like, no, this doesn't perfectly line up on top of the temperature record. You know, some spots are actually significantly far off. So it's like, what the heck? Why in the world, you know, what the hell's going on? Why did Simon Clark show this right on top? And then I noticed something even weirder. Scenario C, look at this green line. Scenario C goes all the way back to 1960. So I went to the original data. This is the original graph, and I'm like, what the frick? Scenario C are these squares. So I'm like, scenario C. Look, let's follow the squares. It's a fun game, you know? Square, 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 square. Found them all. I love this game. It's good. Square, 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 square. And then it's like, oh no, there are no more squares. Look at, you cannot find me another square over here. There's triangles, there's circles. There are no squares over there. This line just stops. Scenario C just stops. Why did Hansen just stop scenario C? I don't know. It was 1988. Maybe he ran out of ink. Look, literally, I have no idea why the line just stops. Maybe he was worried about this just getting too garbled. He's like, there's too many lines over here. I don't know why Hansen didn't show this data in his graph, but he didn't show it, which got me wondering, how the hell did Simon Clark show scenario C all the way back to 1960? So I looked at the reference. Simon Clark, credit to him, he's got his reference in there of where he got this data. So if you take this and you go to, it's a site called Skeptical Science, this was his reference, and they've got their own graph in here, and it's like, oh yeah, it looks just like Simon Clark's graph. Let me zoom in for you. So I'm like, what's going on here? I'm like, wait, their scenario B doesn't go line up perfectly on the temperature graph like Simon Clark's did, but their scenario C does go all the way back to 1960. So I'm like, what the hell's going on? So here's what I could figure out. At first I was like, Simon Clark? Simon Clark trying to pull a fast one. He's trying to pull a Pat Michaels on us. At first I was like, Simon Clark, he's trying to tell us, oh, it's really convenient. Simon Clark's like, hey, scenario B is so good. And look at how good it is. It matches perfectly over here on the left-hand side. But here's what I think actually happened. I think Simon Clark went to this website called Skeptical Science, and he found this graph. And he tried to make his own graph, but someone at Skeptical Science screwed up, and they had scenario C running all the way back to 1960. Well, that ain't true. Scenario C does not go all the way back to 1960. Scenario C peters out around 1980. There's no data back before that point. So someone in Skeptical Science, the website, had scenario C go all the way back, and then they stopped scenario B. If you notice, scenario B just stops. So look, I understand. This graph's kind of hard to read. You look at the triangles and squares and circles, they kind of get mixed up here, but dude, these are obviously triangles over here and circles. There ain't no squares back here. The triangles clearly continue. Scenario B continues. So whoever at Skeptical Science made this screwed up. They thought instead of scenario C stopping, which is what should have happened, and B goes all the way back, they made C go all the way back and they made B stop. And then I'm like, okay, so what must have happened was Simon Clark looked at this, which is already, okay, here's the ironic thing, right? Skeptical Science. Their mission was to debunk climate change misinformation. I'm like, these guys are actually proliferating climate change literally proliferating it. Because here's what I think must have happened. Simon Clark went and looked at this graph. He was like, cool, I want to use this graph. And Simon Clark must have been like, oh no, scenario B doesn't go past this point. So Simon Clark must have just decided, oh, I'm just going to link it up perfectly with the temperature. Dude, he fudged this. He just made this data up. Dude, you can't do that. You can't be doing that. Look, I don't think Simon Clark was trying to mislead because honestly, the money's over here. This is where most of the arguments happen. It's like, hey, how good were the predictions over here? There's no real point to be lying over in this zone, but still you can't do this. Look, it's this type of sloppy failure that just drives climate skeptics absolutely crazy. These type of failures make it so that climate skeptics will never listen to what you say, which is unfortunate because, there's a lot of good info and we know a lot about climate change right now, but this is sloppy. You can't be doing this. You got to meticulously dot your I's, cross your T's, and not fudge your freaking data. So you cannot be doing that. So that's disappointing. Is it the biggest deal? No. I mean, that's bad. You can't be fudging that data like that. But is it the biggest deal? No, it's not the biggest deal. Look, Simon Clark, I doubt you're ever going to watch this video. I mean, why would you watch this video? But if you happen to watch this video, I want you to know, I wish you the best. Quite honestly, I think you're a smart, knowledgeable guy. You make good videos. I actually enjoy learning from your videos. It's just hard. If I have a hard time learning from your videos because they're dripping at times with smugness and condescension toward people that might be skeptical or errors or bias, imagine how hard or impossible it's going to be for a skeptic to try to learn from your videos. And I think you want to make the world a better place. And I think you know to do that. You don't want to just preach to the choir. You want to convert some skeptics into believing that we understand now that greenhouse gases are the only explanation we really have that's backed by evidence for why the Earth has been warming for the last 50 years. So I'll just end with this. Even though, here's something I think people should keep in mind on both sides. Even though one side of this climate change debate has a near monopoly on evidence for why their theory says the Earth is warming, neither side has a full monopoly on misrepresentation, errors, and certainly not bias.